The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China has stopped publishing hundreds of statistics, even official soy sauce production reports, making it harder to know what's actually going on with the economy there. Joining me now, Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good morning. And what is your reaction to this stop in data production by the CCP? I mean, not that we could necessarily believe the data that we've been given for years. Fair enough. I've said that multiple times. But this seems to be a new level.
Yes, this certainly is. And it's been going on now for a couple of years because the Chinese technocrats understand that we use underlying data to draw questions about their headline gross domestic product numbers. So, for instance, we're seeing a lot of evidence that suggests that their 5.4% report of growth in Q1 can't be true. And now, as President Trump said, the Chinese economy is contracting. We saw that from the price data for March and February. We also saw it in the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index for April, which clearly showed factory activity on the downswing. So, yes, the Chinese regime does not want us to know what's going on, and they're going to continue to restrict information to us.
But at the same time, they're trying to solidify relationships around the world at the exclusion of the United States. I mean, look at Russia and China, Iran and China, their moves in Africa, especially in Western Africa, Gordon. So the Chinese seem to be taking another tack. That, they may be closed off to the American market, but they're trying to strengthen their relationships. I mean, even Chevron CEO Mike Wirth, who joined Maria on SMF yesterday, he warned that China could hold more influence on Venezuela if the Trump administration terminates a Biden-era grant that would allow Chevron to export Venezuelan oil to the U.S. Watch what he told her. I want to get your response to this.
A good portion of Venezuelan oil has historically come to the United States. Refineries on the Gulf Coast are designed to run that specific type of oil, and so it's very important for energy security in the U.S. The changes in the rules mean that that oil won't flow to the U.S. now, so making us less secure. China is actually the largest buyer of Venezuelan oil today. Venezuelan government officials have been in China very recently, encouraging China to buy more. And so as the largest buyer today, the policies could drive even more of that trade to China.
And this is sort of China's MO, become a country's biggest creditor and ultimately dominate. And I don't think the U.S. or the Trump administration wants to see China dominating another country.
Well, you're right. We've seen this playbook before in Africa, in Latin America, in Central Asia. And China has created a stronger presence, stronger influence, and control over economies and governments around the world through using their economic assets and position to do so.
Gordon, your reaction to that?
Well, everything that Mike Wirth says is true, but there's another aspect to that, and that is if Chevron leaves, as President Trump has ordered, then the Chinese and Russians will come in, but they'll come in on terms which are not as favorable as the terms that Venezuela had with Chevron. And that means the Venezuelan regime will be weakened. And that's an important thing. Let's remember that the Venezuelan opposition, the people who want democracy in that country, want Chevron out. And they understand the reason why, because Maduro will have less of a good time with this. Also, we've got to remember the context for this. All of that migration during the Biden era through our southern border, that wasn't organic. That was actually supported by the Venezuelan regime, which supported NGOs, which told us what they were doing. They were attacking our sovereignty. So Venezuela is an enemy, and we need to make sure that we don't strengthen our enemies. We can get oil from other places. We can drill on our own soil. We can buy from our friends. Let's not buy from our enemies.
Well, and I think that's the President Trump's point, and it has been for years, drill, baby, drill. We've got the capacity to generate energy here in the United States on our land. Let's do it. I've got Liz Peek on set. She's got a question for you.
Gordon, good morning. there was apparently news coverage in China a week ago or so about factories closing in the South, people being laid off, which I was surprised about because there is such a hold on information flow, and I don't think that's what Xi Jinping wants Chinese people to be watching. What's your take on that? Is he beginning to get pushback for his one-man controlled economy, which is doing so poorly now?
Yes, well, he is. Well, first of all, there are factory closures. China can't sell to the global South or to anybody else the products that it would otherwise have sold to the U.S. because Trump's tariffs at their current rates keep many Chinese products out of our country. And that means these export-oriented factories, especially those in the southern portion of the country, they have been closing. They've been in trouble for a couple of years now, and they certainly are at a point where they can't continue. This is something that is weakening Xi Jinping's hold on power. Remember, he's got near total accountability because he's taken power from everybody else. And that means he's being blamed for the tariff war, as the Chinese call it. And that means his grip, I think, is now weakening. He's not the all-powerful leader that he was pre-COVID.
Along with those nagging questions, Gordon, about his health, which has been brought up repeatedly. And again, because this is China, can't get a clear answer on that as well. Gordon Chang, thank you for being here. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right.
Joining me now is Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is a great friend. Madam Attorney General, welcome to the show. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I think we should be tariffing Hollywood. I know it's not your jurisdiction.
Well, I agree. I think President Trump wants better movies. He loves the movies.
Better movies. Now, over the weekend, this MS-13, a group that Democrats seem to be supporting some of the time, went at a riot in a Virginia prison, tried to kill 6 guards. One of the guards is still in the hospital. Can you tell us about that? It's a terrible story.
Yeah, it is. And I was on the phone late into the evening that night with Governor Youngkin, who is doing an amazing job there. Larry, these MS-13 members are serving, I think all of them are serving almost life in prison. 5 of them are in for murder, 1 for rape. One of the murders involved decapitating a person, cutting their body up so small that it fit in a small trunk. The other one cut off someone's hands, and they called him the butcher. I mean, these are the worst of the worst. 4 of them were illegal aliens, should not have been in our country, committed the worst of the worst violent crimes. 2 of them were one was an El Salvadorian national, so he was in the country legally, and the other was an offset of the MS-13 gang. They were organized. It wasn't just a riot. They had planned this. They had plotted this. It was organized, and they were targeting the lives of our guards. All of the guards except 1 are out of the hospital. 1 is in the hospital still. I'll be talking to him tomorrow. He's in stable condition. But that's what's happening with these terrorists who should not be in our country. They're coming into our country illegally, and they're committing the worst of the worst crimes, the ones I just described to you. And we're going to lock them up forever. And if not, we're going to send them back to El Salvador where they belong, and they need to be in a horrible prison where they're never going to get out. Well,
that was my next question was, you want to keep them locked up for life. I guess there's no capital punishment in Virginia. I don't know that, but they have life sentences. But it's expensive to keep them around for life. Some numbers, I don't know, cost $61,000 per year per criminal. So that's not nothing. That really mounts up. Or is it better to send them back? And does the other party, look, you're the Attorney General. It's not really a political spot. But the other party seems to want to defend MS-13 or want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And what you're saying is the evidence mounts on top of it, and keeps mounting, that they deserve no such thoughts, no such permanent doubts.
Yeah, and Larry, these are the worst of the worst. They came in here illegally. They're committing not just a murder. A murder is horrible. Shooting someone is horrible. But they are torturing people. They're cutting their hands off. They're murdering them. They're cutting their body parts up. These are the guys doing that to Americans. And so they're being sentenced in an American prison. And yeah, it's about $55,000 to $60,000 in Virginia to house an inmate. But that's not in isolation. These guys must be in isolation. They're able to run their gangs out of our prison system. Think about that. That's why I'm all in favor of Alcatraz, by the way. These guys have to be out of society. society, isolated, locked up forever, where they can't run their businesses out of our prisons, and they can't do things like that to try to kill our guards and our law enforcement officers any longer in our prisons. Yeah, this shouldn't be a political issue. This is a public safety issue.
So if certain judges don't want to let you deport them back to El Salvador or wherever, the president suggested over the weekend maybe rebuild and reopen Alcatraz, put them there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean someplace.
I'm all for that. All for that. And I think it will be a cost savings. We'll have specially trained guards. They'll be in isolation. They won't be able to run their businesses. And it sends a very strong message that if you do this, you are going to be out of our society forever. Had these guys been housed at Alcatraz, this would have never, ever happened. They're drug dealers. They're the worst of the worst, and they're killers.
Drug dealers. Now, there may be new talks with China on trade. Maybe. We don't know for certain yet. Howard Lutnick may enlighten us when he comes on. But I believe your point is, and the point of many in law enforcement, is that the fentanyl trade continues virtually unabated. China is the manufacturer of some of the raw materials for fentanyl that are killing people left and right. Some numbers between ages 18 to 34. Its biggest cause of death is fentanyl-related deaths, which is quite remarkable. Round numbers, almost $3 trillion cost of damages from fentanyl. These are staggering numbers. What do we do about it? And we have to think about this with China, because I was in the room in Buenos Aires, Argentina, G20 meeting, big dinner, President Trump and President Xi, both sides. You know how that works. First thing Mr. Trump said, this is back in 2019, okay, late 2019. He said to Xi, will you make fentanyl, will you end fentanyl, will you make it a capital punishment in China? And Xi, without batting an eye, said, yes, I will. And that was one of many lies he has made to us down through the years. What do we do about this?
Yeah, and Larry, it's interesting. People in China don't get addicted to fentanyl because they're shipping it to our country to kill 18 to 34-year-olds. 75,000 Americans are dying every year because of fentanyl. It is a weapon of mass destruction, in my opinion. It's destroying lives. It's costing our taxpayers trillions of dollars. And it's killing our kids, 18 to 34, #1 cause of death. The precursors are all made in China. It's shipped to Mexico, into our country, or through now India, other routes, ports of entry, USPS, coming into our country, and they're killing our kids, and it's got to stop. And it takes 1 grain of fentanyl. I put it in here to show you earlier. You can barely see it. It looks like 1 grain. This is salt, not fentanyl. 1 grain is all it takes to kill an American citizen. And that's what these people are doing.
18 to 34, their biggest cause of death is something related to fentanyl.
And people don't know they're taking it. They think they're taking a Xanax or an Adderall or doing cocaine or doing some recreational drug, a Molly, the college kid drug of choice. Yet it's laced, and all it takes is 1 grain of this junk to kill you.
So the border, the southern border is clear,
Sure
secure.
is.
It's phenomenal, first 100 days. But the fentanyl story is not. So that's where we have to focus. Besides deportations, part of the border story was always this fentanyl story that you're describing. Yeah. And so we have to focus on that. That's a law enforcement issue. I think it becomes a trade issue. Mr. Trump,
Agreed.
as you know, has tariffs on Mexico and Canada with respect to the fentanyl trade. Now, how are they doing? Is it possible to conclude anything?
Well, I'll let Howard Lutnick answer the questions about the trade and the tariffs. But again, my job is to keep America safe, make America safe, and this fentanyl is killing our citizens every single day. So much of it was in our country already. President Trump, since he's been in office, has taken out over 22 million pills, 3,400 kilos of fentanyl. Off of our streets since he has been in office.
I didn't know
He's
those
saving
numbers.
lives every single day.
Last one. I know you have a meeting to go to. We love having you on set.
Love it.
We've been talking last week about President Trump's religious revival, including a National Day of Religion that he had in the Rose Garden, which was quite a spectacle. You, on the other hand, as Attorney General, you are, I think, promoting religious freedom wherever and whenever you can. And I know you are devoted to that. in terms of your own personal views. Just give us a few moments on that. How do we defend religious freedom in this country? Because it's so important. And here's Trump putting God back into the country, which is a fabulous thing in my humble judgment. Now, religious freedom, Pam Bondi.
And President Trump has put that in the West Wing, in the East Wing, in the White House, defending religious freedom with Paula White and Jenny Korn.
Right.
Never been done before. In the White House directly, and it's pretty remarkable. I was there for that event. It was off the charts, and his directive to us is to promote and to continue to promote religious freedom. We're doing that. No longer will Catholics be persecuted. Will they be traced by the FBI in their churches? No longer will parents be banned from peacefully protesting outside abortion clinics. Parents at schools can come because of their religious values and say, I don't want my children around trans athletes. They can come to school board meetings without being persecuted and prosecuted. And that's what we're doing with Harmeet Dillon and our civil rights unit throughout the country. We're putting an end to the horrible infliction that they've caused against families in our country because of religious views.
It will save us.
It will save
this campaign. Increasing religion, religious freedom, restoring religion in the public square, in the family, in personal lives, putting God back into it is how it'll save the country.
And protecting Israel and Jewish students where they can go to school and not be persecuted and screamed at and not be allowed to walk in their classes.
Yeah, Harvard hates
No
America.
longer.
Harvard hates America. We're going to talk to Linda McMahon about that later in the show. Meanwhile, Attorney General Pam Bondi, thank you for giving us your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Great.
Welcome back. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent with breaking news to investors yesterday here from the Milken Conference, saying that substantial progress on China trade talks could come in the coming few weeks. President Trump says he will not bring down tariffs to get China to the negotiating table, but notes that Beijing is going to have to make a deal because they need the U.S. consumer. A new report from the Wall Street Journal shows data needed to analyze China's economy is vanishing. Chinese officials no longer publishing data points like unemployment and land sales and foreign investments. Joining me now here at the Milken Institute, International Chairman, Senior Fellow and Advisor Curtis Chin. Curtis, you just made the point, you don't hide data when it's good data.
Absolutely. You know, it's really par for the course. It's not just this year, but in prior years, when things look bad, the data was not forthcoming, which makes it, this is all about investors here. I mean, it makes it tough for investors, and it's probably we're probably going to see less and less, again, foreign direct investment into China.
By the way, the data that we did see last week was painful. Manufacturing was down, exports were down. So the tariffs that President Trump has begun to institute are working, apparently. Well,
I think, we have to define what do we mean by working? And, in terms of, is, of course, the consequence on the people there. But the reality, indeed, across the world, President Trump is driving the agenda. And with your for or against tariffs, you cannot deny that it's led to discussions that hopefully will be the benefit, not just for Americans, but for other countries, and making sure it's a sustainable trading relationship between the U.S. and them.
So based on what you know today, knowing that you've got a lack of data, how would you assess the Chinese economy?
Not well. I think that's the bottom line. We're seeing reports before the data vanished.
Right.
Again, about job losses. China is all about stability. And so that government needs to think through, what do they do, when products are not being purchased, when there's no jobs for the people. China has protests. Sometimes we don't hear about them so much. And what they worry about most are protests from workers, not students, but it's about workers.
The last thing Xi Jinping wants to see are thousands of people in the streets like Tiananmen Square.
Well, I think probably no one wants, violence and protests. But clearly, I would hope that Xi Jinping, as the rest of the world, really wants a better life for Chinese people, too. Really, the Chinese are often the victims when things like this happen and things disappear.
So how does that happen? I mean, there's this massive gap, right? The wealth gap.
Yeah, clearly in China, not just in China, in many parts of Asia, there's growing inequality. Clearly China needs to rebalance its economy. They've talked many years about increasing domestic consumption, and so that things aren't just driven by real estate, by exports. You know, the fear now, I'm based with Milken in Asia, and the fear now often in large parts of Asia isn't so much just the direct consequences of tariffs, but the indirect impacts if that leads to China flooding the market with inexpensive goods that might have otherwise gone to the United States or Europe.
Right, and President Trump is well aware of that.
Absolutely.
By the way, now the president is set to go to the Middle East next week. He's visiting Saudi Arabia. He's going to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. You are just back from Saudi Arabia, right? You also have an op-ed for Fortune. You're questioning whether or not Saudi Arabia is the next China or India. Tell me about your trip and what you're expecting from President Trump in the Mideast.
Sure. I mean, I'd say what a blessing that I was able to go to Saudi Arabia, encourage people to go to. You know, the Saudis have a significant presence here at Milken Institute, not just this year and prior years. Clearly, if I were to sum it up with a headline, this is a kingdom on the move. And so blessed to be there, had the chance to do everything from try out their new subway system, really the longest, like almost robot-driven subway system in the world, but also a chance to meet everyday people. And again, I had some preconceptions, some, I guess, reinforced, some clearly have changed now that I've been there. And so on Fortune, I and a co-author posed that question. Is Saudi Arabia the next China or India, this Asian nations that really going to power the world and power imaginations? In reality, the answer is somewhat no. It's a country, it's a kingdom of 33 million people. But in another way, the answer is yes, this is a nation with the ambition of a China or an India. And how great that the United States and Saudi Arabia have this partnership, as demonstrated by President Trump's upcoming visit to the kingdom.
Well, I was there about, I don't know, it's got to be almost 10 years now, and I was able to interview His Highness on stage, the Crown Prince. And at that time, he was telling me, well, we're opening movie theaters, we're allowing women to drive. Have you seen any of that actually materialize?
Absolutely. Saw women driving. Many women, you know, many of the women are still wearing the very traditional dress. It's all about...
And they're driving with that.
I don't know about that, but clearly women are driving. Where I stayed, I went to the shopping mall, saw the movie theater, didn't go to a movie, but very clearly the pace of change is intensifying. The Saudi Arabia of today is certainly not the Saudi Arabia of 10 years ago. It's a kingdom that's opening up for more and more trade and investment. I was blessed even here in these first 36 hours of the Milken Global Conference to attend a dinner hosted by Saudi Arabia, and so hear firsthand their message about a nation, a kingdom on the move and the investment opportunities.
Well, I hope so.
And they're moving
I would
forward,
like to see that.
not just through investment, but by being a center also of diplomacy. You know, when I was there last, it was the foreign minister of Russia and Secretary Rubio were there. And now this upcoming big meeting again shows that Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, can be the hub of diplomacy and moving that region forward. Also,
it's interesting. While President Trump is going to the Middle East next week, President of China, Xi Jinping, is going to Moscow with Vladimir Putin for quote-unquote Victory Day celebrations in Red Square. That's happening. Well, it actually, May 9th is when they were together. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that includes Japan, China, South Korea, they've agreed to launch a new lending facility aimed to swiftly respond to crises caused by the pandemic and natural disasters. This decision coming after the association's meeting in Milan this past week. Curtis, your reaction?
Yeah, well, first, you know, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, it's 10 nations, and then there's something called ASEAN +3, so that's how they add in, you know, the other nations like a Japan or a Korea. You know, clearly there's a move for greater cooperation, and why they're all in Milan, actually, is for the annual meeting also of the Asian Development Bank. You know, I was blessed to be the U.S. ambassador to that institution, and that institution, again, is trying to drive greater cooperation between these nations. The reality, though, it all comes down to the real results. Money talks.
Yeah.
And so as the U.S. thinks through engagement in the broad Asia-Pacific region, the reality is ASEAN, for the most part, is a friend and great partner of the United States.
What would be the best outcome from President Trump's meeting in Saudi Arabia this week? Next week, sorry.
Well, in many ways, clearly movement forward on, you know, for me, what is something amazing from the first term, the Abraham Accords, in a sense that moving towards, again, a more peaceful, more stable region.
We'll see if the president is able to get the Crown Prince to up his investment in the United States. He says he's going to invest $600 billion. The president said, let's make it a round number and go to $1 trillion. Curtis, it's good to see you.
Always great.
Thank you so much. And we appreciate the conference. Congrats on another successful Milken conference here.
I think we're going to have a very good weekend.
Will you speak to Xi after the weekend talks?
I might, yeah, sure, depending on what Scott says. We Scott is doing certain countries, and Howard's doing certain countries. I mean, I wish I had like 10 more of each. Then we could do them all at one time.
All right, joining me now is the aforementioned Howard, as in Commerce Secretary, Mr. Howard Lutnick, old friend. Howard, thank you for doing this. We appreciate it very much. Congratulations on the deal. That's point number one. And I just want to ask you, I know we could go through lots and lots of details, but the thought occurred to me, in this deal, you've got market openings for agriculture and metals like steel and aluminum, and automobiles, for example. Doesn't this reduce the need for supply chains coming out of China? Okay, and maybe you're going to have other countries, we'll get to that too. But doesn't this reduce the need for those Chinese supply chains where they've been impossible and they lie and they cheat and they steal and they don't enforce phase one deal that we did 4 or 5 years ago? This British deal opens the door to different new supply chains, doesn't it, Howard?
It does a little bit. Remember, we had balanced trade with the UK. When we do our deal with the European Union, that is top topic. Because remember, the European Union's got a $250 billion trade deficit with China, and they have a $235 billion trade surplus with us. So the Chinese just go through Europe to come at us, right? They come at us through Vietnam. You wouldn't think they come at us through Europe, but they do. But the British is really opening market, $5 billion of new opportunity for Americans to export to Britain, where we already had a balanced trade. And what we did is we helped them out, as you pointed out. We said, you know what? You can keep your auto industry. You can only go down to 10%. You can keep it. It's only 100,000 cars we import. And you know, we sell 16 million cars a year. So 100,000 is okay.
Are you handling the freight on the European Union? Because I know how hard that is. I was involved in that years ago. Obviously, Bob Lighthizer was our leader, but I was particularly involved in that stuff. They're impossible. And on top of everything else, they have a value-added tax. Are you handling the freight on the EU?
I am. In fact, I do virtually all the countries. Scott is obviously focused on China, and he does a few Asian countries with me. But basically, I'm the driver of the template together with USTR, right, Ambassador Greer. But I'm the driver of it. That's why we got this deal done, because we were able to move on cars. We were able to move on airplane parts, right, commercial airplane parts. We made a deal and said, you know what, Rolls-Royce engines can come into America tariff-free and get put on Boeing jets. That's perfectly fine. And what did they turn around and do? They turned around and announced they were going to buy $10 billion worth of Boeing jets on top of that. So this is the right kind of deal you want to do with a country, a friend, someone who's willing to open their markets. We help them. We're going to sell them beef, and they're going to buy less beef from other countries. So I think that's the way they balanced it. It's great for us. Remember, $5 billion of new opportunity to export and $6 billion of new tariff revenue into the United States of America to that External Revenue Service. Here we come. Here we come.
You know, on that point, we just had Joe Lavorgna on, and he's been calculating. You're running 45% ahead of last year on tariff revenues, right? Customs-related revenues. Should, you know, the run rate is $125 billion, but it may be more than that as these deals are actually put into place. Now, that's $125 billion is a nice piece of change. You get up to $175 billion or so, maybe. Those are good. You know, we could cut some taxes on that. We could slash some deficits on that. You follow? I mean, I hear Howard Lutnick. I don't know why this is so hard to understand. Fair trade,
well,
reciprocity,
you got it exactly right.
making some money on this deal. I mean, fair trade itself, let's level the playing field. Wall Street goes crazy. Wall Street Journal goes crazy. I don't know why this is so hard to understand, Howard. I don't. I listened to the president today. I watched you guys going back and forth. Why is this so hard? Why is this so hard to understand?
These guys, it's like the dark ages, Larry. They forgot how to do tariffs and fair trade. They think NAFTA, where you take the factory out of Michigan and Ohio and move it to Mexico, is a winning move. But that's not the winning move for GDP. We're going to cut the trade deficit. If we cut the trade deficit 25%, Easy to do. That's 1 point GDP. You build a couple of trillion in factories, 2 points GDP. That's the President of the United States driving 3 points of GDP. And then, just like you said, if the average tariff rate for the world ends up being 15% on average, that's $450 billion a year. Now, Congress doesn't score that, you know, because it's not their pen, it's the president's pen. But you know what's happening to our deficit, and you know what that's going to do to interest rates. It's going to drive them down, and we're going to deliver on Donald Trump's promise.
And look, folks are coming here to invest. I mean, President keeps talking about the buildup of investment. This is real. I mean, whatever the number is, 3 trillion, 4 trillion, I don't know. All I know is a big chunk of cash is coming to the United States. And a lot of American manufacturers are doubling up in the United States. And you're going to reward them in reconciliation with 100% expensing, including factories, which is fabulous. That gives them the incentives to build and expand in the United States. So, again, I don't know. I still don't understand what's so hard to understand here, how good this is going to be. If you implement it, and I'm going to ask you in a minute, but this is pro-growth. You're going to have reindustrialization. I hate to use that word. It's a little hackneyed, but that's what's going to happen. Reindustrialization.
Well, yesterday I met with the 3 biggest pharmaceutical companies, and they said the 15% manufacturing tax rate eliminates their reason to have their businesses anywhere else. They're going to build it here. They said $150 billion, just those 3 companies, $150 billion committed to building pharmaceuticals in America. I mean, this is the kind of move that is going to change the way America works, changes the way America feels about itself, and it's going to drive our economy. It's exactly the way you're talking about it. The tax rate plus, you know, that 15%, the accelerated depreciation. The president understands business. He's talking to businessmen when he says that, and he's going to produce those kind of factory builds in America, and it's going to be impressive. And wait till you see the number coming out of the Middle East next week. If you think the president's exaggerating, wait till you hear the numbers coming out of next week. It's going to be wow.
Well, one thing, let's just talk about that for a minute. He mentioned today, almost as a throwaway, but he said, we're working on 3 more deals right now. I assume you're engaged in those deals, you and Jameson and whoever, Scott. So, but really, is that going to come out of the Far East? Is it going to come out of Asia, or is it going to come out of the Middle East? Give us a sense of where these next deals are coming from, and how fast can you do it, Howard? Can you keep the momentum growing?
Well, okay, we're focused on the big countries, okay, top countries, like the UK was number 6. So we want to do a big country from Asia for sure, because we want to be geographic. We want to show people the structure of how it can done. We like the template idea. We like the form that people understand it, because it'll move the other guys quicker. But remember, giant countries, I don't want to go fast. I want to do it correctly. The president doesn't want to go fast. He wants to do the kind of deal we did today, where we said, look, this is just a win for America, and we figured out how to make it a win for them. So it's going to take a little more time than you think. But we could do a good deal tomorrow. But the question is, when are we going to do the best deal? And I think, like you saw, the president said today, last night he took my deal and he made it better. Last night he took my deal and make it better. So I always let the best deal maker in the world make the deal. You know, I'm a smart guy. I work for Donald Trump. I'm going to let him be the closer every time.
Well, he's a good closer. You can create a deal. As I understand the British deal, you've got some important points, as you've outlined, the president outlined today, but it can grow. The British Prime Minister said it can grow. And I think that's very important. And I just wondered, is that itself a template approach to these other deals? You don't have to have everything exact. You know what you have, you know what the specifics are, but it can grow into something larger. Might make it easier to make these deals. I mean, am I reading you right on this, that this is the approach it's going to take?
Yes, it's exactly right. We're going to get the deals. So we're going to bring, let's say it's a country with a 25% tariff. They open up a lot of their lines. They give us, let's say, $20 billion in opportunity or $25 billion in opportunity. We cut them to 15. And they say, look, we want to get to 10. We'd say, then you've got to open more things, or we've got to do this over here, or you got to invest in us. You know, we'll lay out the way that they can get their tariff rate down, which is all good for the math of America. I mean, this is Donald Trump at his best, creating the opportunity for someone like me to go out and make the deals that are the best for America.
Right.
And, you know, we've got the cards, the way Donald Trump says it, we've got the cards, and we're going to play them incredibly, incredibly well.
All right, terrific. Good luck on all the negotiations. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, thanks for joining us again, Howard. We appreciate it.
Well, President Trump standing firm on trade deals, saying he runs the shop.
I could announce 50 to 100 deals right now because, you know, I'm the shopkeeper and I keep the store. And, you know, I know what countries are looking for and I know what we're looking for. And I can just set those terms. Everybody wants to shop here.
And now China is under pressure and coming to the negotiating table. Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Rep Jamieson Greer are set to meet with their Chinese counterparts in Switzerland this weekend for trade talks. But the Treasury Secretary says he expects they will focus on a de-escalation of tensions rather than a big breakthrough deal.
What we're going to do in Switzerland is we've agreed to talk. Then on Saturday and Sunday, we will agree what we're going to talk about. My sense is that this will be about de-escalation, not about the big trade deal. But we've got to de-escalate before we can move forward.
All right, Larry, so here we are in Switzerland talking about having talks to get a deal. What are you looking for, and are you optimistic about what's happening in Switzerland?
Well, I don't want to be optimistic, but I would say it's a good thing. I mean, actually, some reports since those clips, I don't know, where was the statement he made?
That one?
That
was
was-
the Ingram angle.
Huh?
That was last night.
Last night on Laura?
Bessent was on with Laura, yep.
Because there's some statement he made that they are going to begin to negotiate Saturday. For those who want to move ahead with China, Peter Navarro will not be on the trip.
I said that before. No Lutnick either.
No
If they're
Lutnick.
too brash, it's not going to work.
Now, my experience is Trump only sends Navarro when he wants to scare the hell out of him. But if he keeps them home, that means they're actually going to have a conversation. So this is very good. Jamieson Greer is very good, and Bessent's very good. I don't mean to make it personal with my friend Peter Navarro. But look, this is good. I'm not a big fan of China trade, as you probably know, having been through it in the first term. We made a deal, phase one. They broke every part of phase one. So I would say to you, they'll stop raising tariffs against each other, all right? There might even be, maybe not in Switzerland, but in due course, there may be some mutual reduction of tariffs. But I think President Trump will keep very high tariffs on during any discussions. That's what he did back in the first term. I know the levels are higher now, but I mean, 50, 60, 70% type tariff could easily be kept on. You know, look, you know, we talked about this on our show last night. Canada's not the enemy. China's the enemy. And we mustn't forget that. And I'm sure these negotiators won't forget that either. Whatever China says, you can almost bet they will break their word. This is not only true on trade, this is also true on fentanyl, which has caused great anguish to this country and anybody involved in that. I've said this anecdote before, I'll say it again. When we met at the G20 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, which was, whenever it was, I think it was 2019, you know, we're all lined up, the U.S. on one side with the president, the Chinese on the other side with Xi. And the very first thing Donald Trump said to Xi was, can you stop the fentanyl trade? And would you invoke capital punishment for any Chinese involved in the fentanyl trade and the so-called precursors of fentanyl? And Xi right away said, yes, of course. Capital punishment will stop the trade. So he's lying through his teeth. And unfortunately, that's what they do. all right? Of the whole group that I met years ago, there were one or two genuine reformers who would keep their word, but they'd always be surrounded by a bunch of Chinese communist thugs who were sent around like minders, okay, to make sure nothing's, give away the family jewels, whatever that means. So look, it's good that they're going to talk. I like that. I think the market will like that. The market's up last time I looked.
It is
a good chunk today. I think this China stuff is more important than what Fed Chairman Powell is going to say or blather on. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, I reckon. I'm just saying it's a good thing, but it's not going to be a miracle. You're not going to get a deal. Any such thing. Look, it took us 2.5 years to get a phase one deal, which they then broke. So don't expect any miracles here. There are other countries on the list that are much closer. Scott Bessent also said in front of Congress, I think, that we could get a deal in the next week or two. So that's very positive.
Dagan.
Larry, in the first hour, I read a letter that was sent to me, and it was by somebody who works in kind of wholesale sleepwear business. And he was just, it was sent to me, not a friend either, upset that he's seeing people he knows who have been in the business for decades struggling. He's worried about them going out of business because their suppliers are in China. These are suppliers that they worked years to set up, and they feel like the rug got pulled out from under them. These are Trump supporters. And I just want to know, because I'm also a believer that China's the enemy, and that really, truly trying to crush them and decouple from them will ultimately be great for us. But how do you, and I'm not talking about bailouts, but how do you care for American businesses here who still rely on supplies from China in the interim? And because we can talk about what's going on in Congress, but they're...
No, they got to get. One thing I think could be set up is some form of trade credits, which has been tossed around. In other words, think of the Apple story, okay, where Tim Cook negotiated and all those iPhones made in China. Instead of wrecking his business, he was given a period of time. We don't really know all the details of that. He's moving into India. But I think you can give them some form of trade credits. So if you show your good intention to move from China, there's no reason why this stuff has to be done in China except cheap coolie labor and cheap slave labor, Uyghur labor, okay? So it's high time that these businesses get out of China, okay? That's my basic view of this whole story. Now, I know they can't do it this season, so maybe some exceptions can be made, some carve-outs where you might set up a system of credits, and you can stay in business now, but you're going to have to pay off a credit down the road, and that would be sort of like a tariff credit, if you will. We've done this in other areas. That's a possibility. The first time I heard this was on my show. My pal Steve Mnuchin was on, the former Treasury Secretary, and he talked about that. And I still think that's a viable thing. But the long and the short is, yes, there are going to be some costs, Dagan. All right? There's no way around it. There will be some costs.
If they lie the way you say they do, and I believe you, I'm not questioning that, but if she can sit there and lie to your face, and so we're trying to negotiate with them, Bessent will be there over the weekend, you think to yourself, why didn't the administration go about some sort of an approach like this? And instead of negotiating with China, negotiate with American businesses, because you'd be more successful if you did that. The market wouldn't have turned upside down. There would be timelines. People would understand what they're doing. They could plan better, to Dagan's point. Why did they do it this way if they're going to lie to their faces? And basically what I'm hearing from you is you can't trust anything they say anyway. Then what are we doing?
Well, look, as someone who supports the reciprocal trade idea, a level playing field. Okay, I support that very much. I would be willing to say that the rollout was not done to perfection. All All right, I'll grant you if that's what you're getting
I'm
at.
kind of getting at that, but I'm just saying there was a different way to approach it.
There was a shock and awe to it that, look, you yourself said, remember a couple weeks ago, that actually with 75 or 80 countries coming to Trump, that the shock and awe actually succeeded.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth to that. They came here, and now the deal-making process is being engaged in, even with China. And Wall Street sees that, the stock market's rebounding, very nicely. And so I don't want to go too far. I felt that some of the charge-off formulas, remember the reciprocal charge-off?
Greek alphabet.
That was, really one of the worst things I've ever seen. That came from Navarro's shop. We have since learned. What was it? It was the trade deficit divided by imports.
The total import.
Which means virtually nothing. I don't know what that means. I don't know. You're a professor.
I didn't come up with it.
I was a teaching assistant about 70 years ago. But I'm just saying, I still don't know what that means. And I doubt if those charge-offs will ever be used.
Navarro,
so if that's what you mean, I agree that was not done
Navarro
very well.
said, well, the trade deficit captures all the cheating. And I was like,
no,
it doesn't.
Well, by the way, the thing happened with Canada, too. And the thing, President Trump keeps saying, we're giving them $200 billion a year, meaning that's a trade deficit. Again, with all due respect, and with someone who supports the reciprocity trade policy, I must say, however, when you look at the numbers, excluding oil, which we need, we're actually running a trade surplus with Canada.
Very interesting.
That's why I say Canada's not the enemy, China is, okay? And China is a very important enemy. So, what can I say?
Taylor, round us out quickly.
I've been talking a little bit about how we can't always trust the economic data coming out of China, but we do trust a little bit of what they're doing from the central bank's perspective to help their economy. When Larry talks about trying to put the screws to China, you are starting to see some impact of that. We've talked about how they've cut interest rates and trying to inject more liquidity into their system, all in response to the impact that tariffs are having on their economy. They're lowering that reserve ratio. They're releasing $1 trillion yuan into the country. Larry's looking at me.
None of that matters.
But it shows, right, that the tariffs are working, that their economy is flowing.
The key thing is we have them by the short rope, I'll say, okay? It's a family program. Look at even the papers are, it's best it could. First of all, there are riots in the cities. Factories are being closed down everywhere. And what has China done about it?
Nothing.
It's in the Wall Street Journal. I have not read the whole thing. I'm a little behind the 8 ball this morning because I've been traveling. They just don't post the data.
Yeah, they don't.
They're stopping the data. Now, what does that tell you? What does that tell you about their integrity, about their keeping their word? They're not even showing you the numbers.
I know.
So it is a lot worse than they're even going to. I believe they won't even post the unemployment rate. Xi Jinping, you know what? He thinks he's the emperor of China. Okay, maybe he is at the moment, but this is the kind of thing that could really bring him down. Because what did Trump do? Trump just said, we're your best customer, we're not playing.
Yeah.
Now, how brilliant was that? And I know some American companies were hurt, and I regret that very much. But in the great world of geopolitics, where China thinks it's hot stuff, and they have belts and roads and the Panama Canal and all this stuff, guess what? Trump is slowly turning their water off. And nobody likes that more than I do. I got to tell you that.
We have them by we have them by the pecans.
We have them by the pecans. And by the way, on this point with China, I will side with my old friend Peter Navarro. You just can't be tough enough with that crowd. I'm sorry. But they're just, it's not like the performance of the economy is falling. It's that they won't tell us what the numbers are. All right. How about those apples?
And the numbers say we got to go, but we'll keep talking about all this and more.
President Trump proposed a budget blueprint that would boost defense spending to over $1 trillion for the first time, while slashing budgets for education, foreign aid, environment, health, and public assistance programs. Retired four-star General Jack Keane joins me now. So I get the fact that it sounds spectacularly expensive, over $1 trillion, but put it in perspective for us, General.
Yeah, well, the two things that are happening, and they have a tendency to get merged, and it causes significant confusion. The Congress has worked on and put together, as part of the reconciliation bill, they don't need the appropriators, just the authorizers to do it, a $150 billion supplemental, which would be in a sense a supplemental to the 2025 budget. And that would be the most significant buildup we have seen since the Reagan administration. I've seen the details of it, and it really makes some sense. And it's at the beginning of a down payment to recover the military. And it needs to be rebuilt. And the president campaigned on this rather strenuously about it. The second thing that's happening is the 2026 budget that's coming forward. And in that budget, the military is flat. Actually, if you account for inflation, then it's reduced. So if we go through 4 years of flat defense budgets, even though we've got the upfront supplemental, we are not going to accomplish the president's objective. I mean, he has stated clearly we got to rebuild the military and dig it out of the hole that it's in. And something's got to get squared here before that 2026 budget gets approved. The Congress will have its voice, but I think the Department of Defense also has a voice here to say, and we got to fix this.
Yeah.
It's indisputable. If people saw the classified briefings and where we are with China, we would understand that we have to dig ourselves out of this hole. What are we really trying to do? Are we trying to win a war with China? What we're trying to do is prevent a war with China.
Yep.
And if they outpace us and have greater capacity than what we have in the region, that is an incentive for them to use military force to accomplish what they want in that region. And we don't want them to have that incentive.
No.
We stopped the Soviet Union from doing that by appropriate budgets.
Yep, absolutely. Next one, General. Ukraine's President Zelensky said a ceasefire with Russia was possible at any moment. Now, he called on allies to apply greater pressure to Moscow to put the measure in place. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, first of all, Putin's got several days of a ceasefire culminating around his victory over Nazi Germany in World War II, something they do every year. I think he's doing that for two reasons. One, he's flagging that he's interested in ceasefire, but we all know he's rejected the Trump administration's 30-day ceasefire time and time again. Secondly, he doesn't want Zelensky raining drones and missiles down into Moscow, which they've done before, and humiliating and embarrassing him while he has all these foreign leaders and the public paying a lot of attention to what's taking place in Moscow. But Zelensky cleverly, and I think talking to the administration about this as well, it makes a lot of sense, says, why don't we start a 30-day ceasefire in conjunction with what Putin is proposing? Let's put that back on him. But Putin doesn't want to do that. He keeps stalling because he wants more and more concessions. And he's taken a very hard line here, David.
All right, final one, another hot spot in the world. Israel voting to approve a new ground operation that includes occupying the Gaza Strip, also agreeing to take control over aid distribution. Now, we should mention that the UN Agency for Relief in Gaza had been working hand in glove in many operations with Hamas. Israel just made a huge discovery of a lot of weapons stored with other UN material. So, I mean, somebody, that operation, the UN aid operation, to take it over would mean really demilitarizing Hamas. So it was a very important move. But what do you think about their occupation, the Israeli occupation of Gaza?
Yeah, this is a change in tactics and operations, primarily when General Zamir took over on March the 5th as the chief of the Israeli Defense Forces. He recognized that the previous chief did good work in taking on Hamas. They did a lot of raids. They reduced the number of fighters somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 or 75%. But still, there's several thousand still left, and they're in political control of Gaza. And if the Israelis are ever going to leave Gaza, and at some point they certainly want to, they've got to wrest that political control away from them, and they're going to have to finish off the Hamas fighters to do that. He's made up his mind and convinced the prime minister by occupying the territory, they can do that much more thoroughly now than just conducting raids. And, of course, there's less of the Hamas fighters. Objective, finish off Hamas, depose them as ever being able to control Gaza again.
By the way, we've got a picture. I know we have to run, but we got a picture of a UN aid bag filled with bullets. I mean, it's really disgraceful the way UN had allowed itself to be operating with known terrorists, and that had to end. So at least it's the end of that. General Jack Keane, always a pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. Go Yankees, General.
Yeah, they need a little help with starting pitching. Thanks, David.
Indeed. Steve Forbes joins me now. It wasn't so much rhetoric. I mean, he was describing what is happening in China. And of course, China, you never trust the statistics coming out of a communist country like China. They're always lying about their stats. But are they really hurting as bad? And won't that force them to the negotiating table?
Well, I think right now they're probably trying to figure out this is what you pay diplomats for, to find a face-saving way to get the ball rolling. So I'm sure there's things behind the scenes that haven't been revealed yet. And in terms of China itself, it's not just the short term. What lessons are going to take in the future, especially on the military side? The military is not very happy with Xi Jinping, so who knows what's going to happen there. So a lot of uncertainties, but the sooner we get this done, because there are literally tens of thousands of small businesses in this country that depend on parts or imports from China. So the faster we get this done, the better. And I'm waiting, as everyone is, get some of these trade deals done on the table so people can see real progress is actually being made.
Well, one of the things that I think is scaring China right now is when the EU commissioner was in town a week ago, and he was saying if China tries to dump the stuff that was meant to go to the U.S. on us, we're going to apply the same kind of tariffs that the U.S. is now applying to China, which would mean they would be totally destroyed because they can't. The two largest trading partners they have is the EU, the collective EU, and the United States. Without them, they're sunk.
Well, yes, and this will finally, I think, have a real battle in China. You're going to have the hardliners saying, hey, we must be autarkic again like we were in Mao's times, can't trust the rest of the world. I think you have some reformers probably lurking there and saying we need to develop our internal economy so we're not so dependent on exports and the property market, which is only now finally maybe reaching bottom, that bubble. Yeah. So maybe reforms come in the future. But in the meantime, we hope they don't try to deflect attention on the disaster by doing something like seizing one of the islands around Taiwan.
Right. Well, let's bring it back home. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent defended Trump's economic approach in a new Wall Street Journal op-ed. He said, quote, in the first 100 days of his presidency, we've laid the groundwork to rebalance global trade, restore America's industrial base. The American people should expect to hear the engine humming during the second half of 2025. With all pistons moving, we're going to see more jobs, more manufacturing, more growth, a more robust national defense, higher wages, lower taxes, less burdensome regulation, cheaper energy, less national debt, and less dependence on China, all while maintaining a strong dollar. Steve, I loved that he ended with a strong dollar, don't you?
Yes, because there are elements in that administration who think, as happened in the Bush 43 administration, that a cheap dollar is a way to get instant trade and boost up the economy. All it does is lead to disasters like we had in 2008 and 2009, inflation. So I hope the rest of the team inside the White House and Treasury Department are listening, and also the Federal Reserve listening, because the Federal Reserve is sat by while the dollar has lost value, and they're meeting, as you mentioned, tomorrow and Wednesday. Are they going to finally realize that their main task is a stable dollar, not trying to manipulate the economy It didn't work for the Soviet Union. It doesn't work here.
And it helps Americans. Average Americans want to make sure that the dollar they earn today is going to be able to buy them just as much tomorrow or a year from tomorrow as it does now.
And so they have flawed models at the Fed, like prosperity causes inflation. One interest rate they should cut tomorrow but won't is the interest they pay on bank reserves.
Yes.
Right now it's 4.4%, so banks have that money parked there, doing nothing but earning free interest, easy interest. So cut the rate, cut that by 100 basis points and make it clear you want lending big again.
The great Steve Forbes. Steve, thank you so much for being here.
Welcome back. Well, now the U.S. national debt is creeping ever so closer to $37 trillion. Interest payments alone on the debt, one of the biggest line items in the federal budget. Some economists are warning this could create a fiscal crisis. Joining me right now is a woman who knows better than anybody. Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget President Maya McGuinness is here. Maya, great to see you.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to get right to the elephant in the room, and that is Congress is working on this reconciliation package. They want to extend President Trump's tax cuts, and you say?
Well, we're going to have to offset that with some spending cuts. So there's a whole lot of conversation about tax cuts. And those in many ways need to happen in the fact that if you were to let these expire, it would be a huge tax increase and have a negative effect in the immediate run. However, fiscally, it would help. And so instead of just cutting taxes, we have to cut spending. And Maria, nobody is talking about that. Right? So we're talking about bills that no matter what, and there's two different approaches, one in the House, one in the Senate. The House is far superior, I have to say. But both of them are talking about cutting a range of only a couple $1 trillion in the House and only $4 billion in the Senate. This is out of a total of $86 trillion in spending over the same time period. So for a party that's been talking about cutting spending a lot, yes, I understand we're going to cut taxes. That will help with growth. That will help keep tax rates where they are. But if we don't cut spending, this will balloon the national debt. And the debt is a big topic here. People in the markets are definitely aware of this problem.
Absolutely. Well, look, to be fair, most Republicans that I've spoken with always say the same thing, and that is we have a spending problem. We don't have, another problem. It's a spending problem. Now, you've got an op-ed. You talk about this in your op-ed. You say the financial situation is, quote, dire. And I want to get your take on where the cuts could come from, because you're right. This weekend on Sunday Morning Futures, I had on John Barrasso, leadership in the Senate, and I said to him, how is it possible that the Senate has only identified $4 billion in cuts when the House is at $1.5 trillion? And he said he's going to come up with at least $2 trillion in cuts. Where specifically should Congress be cutting?
Well, good. First off, let's hold them to that $2 trillion, because even then we're going to be borrowing another $3, $4, $5 trillion, given all of the tax cuts. But and like you said, the problem is spending. If you look forward, the growth in the budget comes from spending, not revenues that are lower than they traditionally have been as a share of the economy, but spending. But you have to have the willpower to cut the spending. So the problem is they're taking everything off the table. So one thing is that in reconciliation, the biggest program and the biggest challenge, quite frankly, Social Security cannot be included. We can go back and talk about Social Security, but that program, despite what every politician is telling us, is headed towards insolvency. And if we don't make changes to strengthen it, there will be across-the-board automatic spending cuts, which is a terrible, terrible thing that's even in the future. There are things that they can be looking at. They should be looking at Medicare, and they should and are be looking at Medicaid, because our health care delivery system has tons of areas where there are huge problems. We've expanded the budget in health care massively in recent times, and we have not brought that back to different levels. There are a lot of savings there that will not affect recipients. But I'm also worried about the conversation of, we shouldn't affect everybody. We've borrowed trillions too much every single year. We're going to have to make some real choices. Yeah. But another area in the budget they're not looking at all, $20 trillion plus in tax expenditures over the budget window. And that is, quite frankly, spending through the tax code. So we act like it's tax cuts, but it's things that really increase in inefficiencies, equities, de-level the playing field. We want to broaden that tax base so we can keep rates low and then look at all the areas of the budget, the discretionary portion, welfare programs, Medicaid, which they're looking at, but there's spectrum, there's repealing parts of the IRA, the ACA, a lot of things that have expanded in the past couple of years that we could scale back, and we could certainly get that $2 trillion. And frankly, we should be shooting
for more. Well, I'm with you on the Inflation Reduction Act. There's
a
so
lot.
much fat in that
There's a
IRA,
lot.
for sure. But herein lies the debate within the Republican Congress, the House and the Senate, and they can only afford 3 votes, no votes, in order to pass President Trump's agenda. Many people are saying this is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to actually seriously put a dent in spending. You just mentioned Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. DOJ came up with these ideas and said, look, there's waste, fraud, and abuse, but that's a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, I'm a fan of Doge. I think we should be doging everything and look through the line item of everything, getting into the details. Really impressive. But it also became the bright, shiny object that took the oxygen away from where the real structural savings are. So we've got to get rid of waste and frost. We have to improve efficiencies. I think Doge can restructure some of our agencies in ways that would work better, but that is not going to save the trillions that we need to save. We have to look at our mandatory spending. We have to do defense spending smarter. We're going to need more revenues in defense. The truth is, as the world gets riskier, but we have to look at our procurement process and other areas, and we have to look at every one of our major programs, many of which just have not been discussed for specific spending cuts in years, and people are used to pretending we don't have to make any choices. That's what budgets are, though. They're
Once
choices.
you give somebody something, they don't want to give it back.
You have a
and that's an
constituency
issue.
for it.
And by the way, what elected official do you know that's actually going to come out and say, yeah, I'm running for re-election in November, but by the way, I'm cutting your Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security while I do it?
But everybody talks about cutting spending in the talking points. Nobody's willing to fill in the details. And now that we have to talk about details, that's where it's getting more difficult. Credit to those fiscal conservatives, particularly in the House, who are actually pushing to do more spending cuts. The real divide is between those folks who say, I'm not going to touch Medicaid. We need to touch Medicaid. There are savings to be had there, more so even with Medicare. Credit for the ones who are actually willing to have the conviction, the courage of their conviction, and talk about enacting some of those cuts now that they have the opportunity.
When you say we are going to have to cut Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, what are you saying? Are you saying you want to cut those programs back to give people less?
First off, let me just say, I don't want to do this. I wish we hadn't been borrowing for 3 decades. Right. So now what we're going to have to do is a little bit of everything. There are ways to start by improving the efficiencies of every one of those programs.
Yeah, good.
And then you have so much built-in growth. What we just need to do is grow the programs more slowly.
I know you're talking about this. Go ahead, finish.
No, I was just going to say that it doesn't mean we'll actually be spending less. We're going to be spending more each year than the year before. Even under the budgets they're talking about, reconciliation, we'll be spending many more trillions over the budget window, not less. We're not cutting, but we do need to bring the growth rate down from where it is.
See, the last time Congress was at this in President Trump's first term, they did the tax cuts in December. But now they've got the debt ceiling, and President Trump wants that raised by $5 trillion. So they've got this X date. They've got to do it sooner. Now, let me ask you about the president's budget, because he's proposing $163 billion in cuts from the federal budget. He's targeting federal programs like climate initiatives, public broadcasting, foreign aid. Your assessment?
Well, it's interesting. So on the micro level, there are very large cuts in certain areas, like you just mentioned. On the macro level, that $163 billion that would be reduced in the discretionary budget, they're actually adding back in the reconciliation bill. So again, not really all the spending cuts we're talking about. So in specific areas, there would be very large cuts, much larger than we've generally seen. But at the top macro level, we're actually talking about budget that would be flat. All of it would be added back in, but much of it would be taken away from domestic discretionary and moved into the areas of defense and homeland security.
What specifically, go back to the cuts here for a second on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid that you want to see. What specifically, what number and how much do you think they could cut without really cutting into the muscle of what people are expecting, our seniors?
Yeah, let me first say where I think the target should be, because I think Secretary Bessent has laid out the exact rate target.
Well, he knows
the correct target. He knows this issue. He cares about this
yeah.
issue. And he said we need to get our budget deficits down from where they are above 6% of GDP to 3% of GDP. Let's go. Let's make that our target. That is a very aggressive number. But keep in mind, we used to talk about balancing the budget. This is only half that, right? So this is getting it to a sustained deficit, whereas we used to be shooting for zero. That would take about $7.5 trillion in savings over a budget window, and that is about 5 times as much as the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is the previous and only debt reduction deal that we've had in over a decade. So it's very significant. It is doable, but it's certainly aggressive enough that it would reassure markets. You need to look at everything, though. On Social Security, I'll say the hard things other people won't. We need to talk about raising the retirement age and slowing the growth of benefits for people at the higher end. We need to talk about our delivery system in Medicare. We need to talk about all sorts of things like how we charge different amounts of money for the same health care at different areas and create something called site neutral. On Medicaid, we have all these provider taxes that are really state gimmicks, scams, honestly. We need to clear them out of there and do those things first. $7.5 trillion in savings is a lot, but the 3% target is what we should be shooting for.
By the way, I don't know why everybody's afraid of raising the retirement age.
know.
We're working, we're
living.
living longer, and we're working longer anyway.
And let me be
Nobody
clear.
actually, you know, retires and then goes and jumps on the hammock.
Well,
right? I mean, they're doing other stuff.
And it's
so
it's
yeah,
not for
there
the
you go.
bricklayer. It's not for somebody who's been doing backbreaking work, but people who are sitting at their desks are working to 70, 80. We're living decades longer.
That's
You
an
can't
easy
afford
one.
not to do this.
In my view, and I
right?
hope I'm not insulting anybody at home because I love our viewers so much, but I don't think that's a tough one. Maya, great to have you.
Thanks.
We got to wrap
Thanks
this
for
up.
having
We
me.
so appreciate your work. Very important work. Maya McGinnis, we'll be right back.
The new Pope faces a crisis. It's about money. The Vatican is in dire financial straits. Maybe the cardinals picked an American for the papacy because America is the church's richest province. Because somehow the cardinals overcame their unease at electing someone from a country with Donald Trump as the head of state. Well, they elected him. Of course, Pope Leo will have to grapple with doctrinal issues. Blessing same-sex couples, for example, ordaining female deacons, or offering communion to divorced and remarried Catholics. Steering church teaching, that is job one for a pope. Job two will be fixing the money problem, which seems almost impossible. The Vatican has a $400 million pension liability and a $100 million annual budget deficit. It's not exactly broke, but it's real close. If it were a normal country, the Vatican could raise taxes and/or cut costs. Well, the Vatican is anything but normal. Under its founding charter, it cannot tax the 900 souls who call it home. Pope Francis tried to cut costs, but he ran into chronic stalling tactics from the bureaucracy. Financial worries are said to have been a big reason for Pope Benedict's retirement. He was just overwhelmed. Hard to believe that the main source of revenue is the sale of museum tickets, but that is where most of the Vatican's income comes from. And yes, it dried up completely during the long COVID shutdown. That made the crisis even worse. Now it's crunch time. They have to get some money, and they've got to get it fast. The thing is, the Vatican is cash poor, but it is wildly asset rich. The museums hold Michelangelo's, Da Vinci's, priceless manuscripts, treasures from 2,000 years of history. Why not sell a few items? Well, the Vatican has always been loath to monetize its treasures, but there's an American running the show now, and Americans are very good at selling assets to bring in cold, hard cash. Leo could even call up Elon Musk for advice.